Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to my channel, I Hate Rock Music, and I'm going to do another one of these kind of videos I've done quite a bit over the last year or so, not focused on a particular album, but focused on a what if. And in this case, it involves the band Queen, and I don't really have to go into the lineup too much. Roger Taylor, John Deacon, Freddie Mercury, and Brian May, incredible lineup. And the first Queen album is still my very favorite. And I know it's kind of blasphemy for a lot of people, particularly people who are younger than me, that I really love the first two Queen albums. And when they kind of started integrating more eclecticism and more pop, I had issues. But that said, I continue to buy their records. And but I still love that first album. I just think it's amazing. And it's not surprising because since they started in 1969, 1970, they had a lot of time to work on the material for that first album, and it really shows because the arrangements are incredible. The vocals, needless to say, are incredible. Brian May's guitar work is incredible, and Roger Taylor and John Deacon are a killer rhythm section. And so it has everything, but I just think the material and the arrangements are so deep and so wonderful and so complex and so interesting and so powerful. That first album is really a consummate work. But what gets me is over the years, of course, their early demos have surfaced. And so we have a demo floating around that has Keep Yourself Alive, Liar, Great King Rat, Jesus, and The Night Comes Down, which all showed up on the first Queen album, and then a unreleased song called Mad the Swine. But I guess my point being that all of these tunes were recorded at Delane Studios, so they were done really top notch. They almost aren't demos; they're produced so well. But it really blows my mind that these demos were recorded in 1971, and that's my whole topic of this video is the fact that Queen was doing this material in 1970 and 1971, which is just mind blowing. And if they had managed to put out their first record in 1970 or 1971, it would have been even more mind blowing than it is. And I got a set list from a show that Queen did in 1970, and it shows that not only were they doing all the material that's on the first album, but they did some tunes that ended up showing on later Queen albums as well. So the complete set list is Stone Cold Crazy, Now I'm Here, Father to Son, Hangman, Doing All Right, Son and Daughter, See What a Fool I've Been, Stormtrooper and Stilettos, Jesus, and then they finished the show with three covers: Cliff Richard's Please Don't Tease, Elvis Presley's Jailhouse Rock, and Bo Diddley's I'm a Man. And certainly on I'm a Man, they sound much more like 70, 71 and really heavy and really straightforward. And but looking at that set list, it's clear by 1970 they were already doing all the material that was on the first album as well as things that showed up on the second and third album. And like I say, I just find that mind numbing. So not only are the demos amazing that they were recorded in 71 and they had their whole thing together, because the demos are not that different than what ended up coming out on the album besides Roy Thomas Baker's thick production. But that's striking enough. But the fact that they were doing this material in 1970, which is borne out by this set list, and then we have an entire itinerary, which I'll post below as well, of all the shows they ended up playing in 1970 and 1971. And they did quite a few shows. Some of them were in smaller places, and I guess attendance wasn't always that great. But to think that they were out there doing regular gigging and were rehearsing the material they ended up recording for these demos as early as 1970. And for me specifically, because I'm near 70 myself, thinking about what kind of music was around in 1970, and then imagining this first Queen album coming out in 1970 just completely blows my mind. And also, reading about the history of the band, it's kind of interesting that their first bass player was Barry Mitchell, who used to be in Crush Butler, which seems like an odd person to pick for the band. And then also, as I'm not surprised by the fact that a lot of labels were interested in the band, and well, they should. Some of the live material that's come out now from 1970 shows the band pretty developed, a little bit rawer than what they became, but they already had a really impressive lineup of tunes and an incredible live presentation. And so I know that Charisma is one of the labels that offered them a contract in 1971, and they probably got a number of other offers as well. And so the only reason something didn't come out earlier is because they were honing their craft and also shopping for labels and had a lot of label interest until they finally found Elektra being the label they thought would be the best fit for them. And I also love the story that they were inspired because they saw David Bowie and the Spiders from Mars, and so that helped guide the direction of the band. And that kind of makes sense because in 1970 and 71 they were a little bit more a fit with the UK scene of 1970 and 71. But after seeing Bowie with his persona and how amazing the Spiders from Mars were live, they upped the drama, added a little bit of glam, and then we end up with the first Queen album in 1973, even though it was recorded in 72. And I also find it interesting that one show they played at Bedford College in 1972, apparently 6 people showed up. And so, an interesting beginning for such a stellar band. But that's the bottom line for me is I just felt compelled to do this video and really drive it home that it really is incredibly stunning that Queen had already developed all that material that showed up in 1973 as early as 1970. And it's also wonderful that some of the early live material and these demos have surfaced, bearing out this fact. And the demos, like I mentioned, there's not much different really overall from the 71 demos and then something that came out 2 years later. Truly incredible. So anyway, I'll be interested to see any comments people have. I know a lot of Queen fans out there are going to have some issues with what I've talked about, but overall we're going to have to agree that the fact that everything on that first Queen album was already conceived and written and performed and arranged and sung in 1970 is really truly unbelievable. If it had come out in 1970, it would be even more legendary than it already is. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching I Hate Rock Music.